Good evening, Bruins and friends. My name is Monica Lee, and as Director of Regional Communities at the UCLA Alumni Association, it's my pleasure to welcome you to our discussion on ALLOS, the story of Carlos Bulosan, in partnership with Artists at Play and their free theater for young audiences performance in celebration of Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. Artists at Play produces theatrical programming that explores the Asian American experience. In the presentation of these multifaceted stories, they provide resources and a platform for underrepresented theater artists while serving audiences within Los Angeles and beyond. Through their main stage productions, new play development, and other events, they advocate for and collaborate with diverse communities of artists. Tonight, we're excited to hear from Artists at Play producing artistic leader and founding member and UCLA alum Stefanie Lau, as well as playwright and UCLA alum Giovanni Ortega, along with actors Earl, Baylon, and Reuben about this production. UCLA Alumni Association programs and services are made possible by Bruins like you. To ensure the future of activities like these, please consider making a gift today at giving.ucla.edu/alumni. And finally, thank you all for joining us and for your support of our UCLA alumni programs. And without further ado, I'm pleased to turn this over to Stefanie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stefanie Lau, and I am a founder and producing artistic leader of Artists at Play. I graduated from UCLA in 2000 and was an editor of the Daily Bruin and Pacific Times News magazine. My pronouns are she, her. First, I'd like to acknowledge that the participants of tonight's panel are joining in from the unceded native lands of the Chumash and Tongva people, colonially known as Los Angeles. I also want to recognize that today is the National Day of Awareness for Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two Spirits. Native American women and girls experience some of the highest rates of violence in the United States. To learn more about this epidemic, please visit the UCLA American Indian Student Association Instagram account at Native Bruins or visit mmiwusa.org. We're here today to celebrate the Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. May is also Jewish American Heritage Month. And while designations like these help highlight the contributions of various groups, we'd like to remind people that the histories of marginalized communities needs to be learned every day of the year, as our histories are American history. Artists at Play has been producing work that explores the diverse experiences of the Asian American community since 2011. As part of our current Theater for Youth programs, we are presenting 2 shows that explore people and events which are cornerstones to the Asian American history. Tonight, we're going to speak to a few of the artists who created ALLOS, the story of Carlos Bulosan. We are first joined by ALLOS playwright, Giovanni Ortega. Gio is a multidisciplinary playwright and performer who develops narratives for marginalized voices. He is an assistant professor at Pomona College. Actor Reuben is originally from the Philippines, where he had an extensive theater career before coming to Los Angeles. He was also a member of the music group Acapellas. And lastly, we have Earl Baylon. He is a Los Angeles-born actor and improviser, turned streamer during the pandemic. Adobo is his 8th favorite Filipino food. Thanks everyone for joining us. For a bit of background, Carlos Bulosan immigrated to the United States from the Philippines in 1930. He worked as a laborer up and down the West Coast, and through his experiences, became a labor organizer, writer, and poet. America is in the Heart is his semi-autobiographical novel. So Gio, you were commissioned by East West Players to adapt the book into a play for their touring Theater for Youth program. Can you tell us about the process of adapting the book into a play? What were some of the things that you wanted to hold on to in the storytelling? What were some of the themes and the important information that you wanted to share with, middle school and high school kids who were eventually going to be seeing this play?
Thanks, Stefanie. Hi, Earl, Reuben, Monica. What's up, Bruins? Hope we're in the house. Yeah, thanks for that question. So Marilyn Takuda at East West Players was seeking a playwright to write about Carlos Bulosan. So it's a funny story. she called me and she's like, "Hey Gio, do you know any playwrights who could write about Bulosan?" And I'm like, "Oh, I wrote something about him." And she was like, "Oh no. I mean playwrights." So but she's like, "Yeah, go ahead and send me your excerpt." And yeah, I sent it, and they chose it, luckily enough. Um, and at that point, I think we had about 6 months to write a draft, noting that the area that East West Players is in and the Theater for Youth audiences where they tour is densely populated by Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, and Filipinos. Monterey Park, Alhambra, Los Angeles area, obviously. So I think it was really important for me to find the shared experience of middle school students, right? I moved to this country when I was 12, so that was like very relatable shared experience with myself and Carlos Bulosan, who moved here when he was around 16. That's a huge starting point. That's why, Americans at the Heart is such a massive book. So I really wanted to touch on the experience of being poor in the Philippines, but then the experience of being poor in America as well. But through a lens where young adults can relate to it to a certain degree, and so I did my research for the next 6 months, and then we did rewrites, and eventually we presented it in 2011. So the commission was 2010 of July, and then it toured March of 2011. Yeah, around 10 years around this time.
And when you originally commissioned, or when you originally wrote it, it was a one-person
Oh, yeah.
show.
Oh, right.
Who played all the characters? So I guess I have a couple questions with that. What were then the challenges of kind of condensing so many experiences and stories and characters into one actor to portray? And then what did you kind of get out of, or what were you able to add more when you expanded the play to have multiple actors portray it? Our version has 4 actors, but you also had a 2-actor version and a 3-actor version.
Yeah.
So what were the challenges and benefits of all of that?
I think what was really important for me for the one-person show, it's the narrative is his journey, right? It really is Carlos Bulosan's journey and his interaction with the environment that he was in. So Macario and Amado, Dora, Miss Strandon, they're all, he's the protagonist, obviously, still is, right? But the journey is his journey. And as it moved along, so if y'all saw it, the Tagalog version where he sees Amado was not there before, right? Because it's a little harder for one person to go back and forth with the dialogue in Tagalog and in English. But I noticed that when Circa Pintig, a Chicago theater company that tells the stories of Filipino American narratives, put it on, they were interested in having 3 men, cisgender men, play it. And so I was like, oh, then it could transform into a story about brotherhood, specifically brown men of color in the United States and the narrative that we go through. Also because of the manongs and the discrimination, anti-miscegenation law, I think in the film, Fran does a phenomenal job really conveying and showing the brotherhood of Filipino men back then. Filipino women were not allowed really to migrate until the exclusion happened in the 40s and 50s, and then the 60s came and the nurses arrived, right? And then it's all Filipino women who also came. And then the 70s with Filipino and Filipina in the military. So this iteration really, I really wanted to delve in the relationship of three brothers who are different from each other. But then when Artists at Play, when y'all kind of brought it in 5 years ago, I was like, she was raised by, he was raised by really phenomenal and powerful women. And in the book, you know, there's so many female characters who are integral in his growth, from Miss Strandon to Nanai, to Dora specifically. And there's so many other female characters. And I was so glad to actually bring that in. One note is that it is through this iteration, Artists at Play's production, where Nanai change the quote of "Don't give up," because before it was "Don't stare." Don't stare not, my child, don't stare. And I was like, no, that does not make sense, because he becomes an activist. So if he's constantly not staring, he would not get anywhere, right? So it became "Huwag kang bumigat," don't give up. And that was such an aha moment. Thanks for Melody's brilliant acting. And I was like, yeah. And that's when you see when a playwright is influenced by the talent he's surrounded with. And also I was raised by strong Filipino women, so I'm surrounded by really powerful women. And so that's kind of like how it evolved continuously.
We're going to generally take Q&As from the audience at a later time, but there's one that Tim Miller actually just posed that I think is relevant to this conversation. Tim asks, is there any thoughts to expand the play into something full length? Just because we know that there's so much story to tell in Carlos Bulosan's life and in that book.
Oh, sure. I'll take a commission. But also I've corresponded with the family, and there's so much more. We kind of ended it in When America's in the Heart is published. There's 13 more years thereafter. And Karen Bulosan, who's actually Carlos Bulosan's great niece, the great grandchild of Macario, was kind of sharing stories of all these different stories that still needs to be told.
That's great. Earl, so you're pretty well known in the voiceover and video game industry. You've worked on the series, the Tomb Raider series of video games, and you're also a well-known podcast host with the Geekish Network. But can you tell us why you love theater and how a piece like ALLOS resonates with you?
Well, I think that there's a certain immediacy to theater that you don't get with either voiceover film or podcasting, and there's also the fact that each show is it's kind of ephemeral, right? Like once it's performed, that's it for the night. That's the performance of the night. And if you were there when you saw like a blockbuster performance, then you have that memory, and nobody else is. You share that with that particular audience. So there's something special about that. I do think that while like doing voiceover and TV and film and stuff, that all that is it's amazing stuff. You get to tell amazing stories. I think you sharpen your skills in the theater. I think especially if we're talking in in LA, I think that sometimes if you're not working as a regular or recurring on a show, a lot of people aren't acting, and for me, there were times where it would be slow on and on the studio front, but I kept myself busy doing sketch, improv, and theater, and just being able to do that has kept me sharp. So it's another tool. I love the immediacy of everything, and the ability to work with somebody face to face in a long uninterrupted format. And I mean, that's a great thing about theater, right? It's live, it's real, and it's kind of a tightrope act sometimes, and I think that's great. I think why something like ALLOS resonates with me is, I mean, it's the quintessential Filipino American experience, right? It's the first book. If you start studying as learning about your history as a Filipino American, it's like the first book that gets brought up in almost every conversation. And to be able to take these words, not only from Carlos Bulosan, but like from Gio, and take these words and bring them to life. It's an awesome experience, because I think we all, as actors and artists, quintessentially at the very root of us, we're all storytellers, and we tell stories because they bring about catharsis in not only us but the audience that's participating in it. So to be able to be part of that entire process with something as important and as oddly timely as ALLOS is, it's an awesome opportunity.
And we're really glad to have you on this production of it. And then to Reuben, now you've done this show with Artists at Play twice online. The first was last October for Filipino American History Month in partnership with USC's Pacific Asia Museum, and now this production. And you have an extensive theater career, both in the Philippines and in Los Angeles. What's kind of different for you in rehearsing, in creating Zoom theater? Do you miss live theater? What are some of the things that you think work with Zoom theater that you would like to see continue?
The main difference between live theater and Zoom theater is the instant feedback that you get. When you're doing Zoom, you can see yourself. You can see yourself acting like in real time, and you can see if oh, that's not what I intended to do. Whereas beforehand, when you would rehearse live in a room or whatever it is, things of that nature, you kind of rely on the director to give you the feedback and like kind of, this is what I would like instead of doing that. And then you realize you realize a lot of things. And I think in the same way that that people who hold like office jobs or, your regular 9-to-5s and stuff, you realize that there's a lot of things in the process of the work that you don't actually, that you can kind of, there are steps that you can skip. So this is one of those, like, oh, so that's not what I meant to do. Whereas before you can have some miscommunication with your director, like, because you have a different point of view of what you're doing and you don't realize that you were doing that until you see it, like, oh, that's what I was doing. For example, like you kind of furrow your eyebrows and like it makes you look angry, but like, oh no, I was thinking happy thoughts and that's not what I meant to do. So it's kind of hard to explain. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is there's something about being watched that makes us behave differently, in my opinion, as theater actors. And I think the best of the best theater actors know how to perform with other people's energy without being overcome by it, it's like a wave, when you're swimming in the ocean, you get kind of
pulled under.
Yes. Thank you, Earl, my friend.
Got you.
So when you get kind of pulled under with a wave, and there's a certain mastery of what you're doing. And so actors, I'm sure a lot of people in the audience have heard like even award-winning actors being shy in terms of watching themselves on screen. Like, I think Jared Leto kind of hides under the covers every time he sees himself on screen. There's just this self-consciousness, you know, that you have to overcome. But I've learned to overcome. I think Earl has learned to overcome, as Zoom has, you know, you're kind of like, oh, okay, you know what? Because you can either fight it or embrace it. You can either be the old guy on the lawn, like, yeah, back in those days, this is not what we did. You can, or you can embrace what's in, yeah, get off my lawn, you pesky kids. Or you can embrace what is in front of you, which is, this is the only way you can access. And then you learn to prioritize what's important. The important thing is to, convey Giovanni's story, and not just his story, but the lens that he used to explain the story, which he wonderfully has encapsulated earlier. It's a story of brotherhood. So that's what's important, right? And theater, live theater, Zoom, that's just the medium. And so in performing for Zoom, my performance has changed, like from the last time we did it in October. Because I think at that time I was still, you know, again, when you're being watched, you don't realize you act very different. And then when you're just alone, and then you realize, like, okay, but what is the essence of what Gio is trying to say? You kind of just kind of zoom in and just focus and zero in on the important things. And the beautiful thing about Zoom is you see what's unnecessary right away. Like, oh, I didn't need to do that. I didn't need to do that to convey the words. I didn't need to do that to convey the scene. Like, for example, the part where I play a racist guy and kind of beating up on some Filipinos with a toothpick in my mouth. In October, I was even doing a laugh and like, ah, ha, ha, mwah, ha, ha, mustache twirling villain and things like that. Albeit, admittedly, there's also more gravitas now that we realize that things haven't changed much from Carlos Bulosan's time, you know. We're still being attacked nowadays. And so because I think when I was doing the show in October, there's this sense of like, it's a different time. That was then, this is now. But then you realize now is the same as then. And so I myself felt different about it. And again, embrace what's in front of you. Zoom has my face like right here. So how do we convey that? And Fran really liked the direction of just saying it like I meant it, as opposed to like playing the villain, because it's young audiences, right? That's how we are. Like, oh, we're performing for young audiences. Let's ham it up a little bit. But you realize kids, whether kids or, you know, adults love Star Wars. It used to be for children, you know what I mean? Things like that. Stories are universal, and kids are gonna know. We don't need to pander, or we don't need to act like, oh, this is how I act for a 5-year-old. This is how I act for an adult. Truth is truth. And yeah, trust in the words that Gio has written, trust in the direction that Fran has laid out for us. And we also had a powerful like powwow on, you know, different works of Carlos Bulosan, and it just, I think it has a thread, you know. I don't know if the audience felt it, but I felt it when we were performing, like me and Earl and Mike, even though we were on Zoom and it's all digital, but there was that thread, like I could touch him, like, you know, there was a thickness in the air. And I think we succeeded in still making this theater, even though it's filmed.
Yeah, unfortunately, Fran De Leon, who directed three versions of ALLOS now for us, for Artists at Play, she is really amazing in creating collaborative environments for all of the artists who are working on a piece. I mean, the first time we did this was in person for performances a few years ago. And then now, you know, online, where we didn't sit in a room together at all. It was all, you know, a week of Zoom rehearsals. But you could still feel the collaboration and how everyone is on the same page with the same goal. And it's to have quality storytelling that really conveys, you know, the play that Gio has written, the words that he's written. So kind of related, Reuben, what you brought up, that you know, the ideas, a lot of kind of the history of violence, right, that has, and you know, Gio writes about this in ALLOS's experiences too. You know, the violence against the Asian American community has been around for, you know, decades. This is not something new. The rise in anti-Asian violence during the pandemic has certainly brought more attention to it. And if anything, that demonstrates that we need to make sure that stories of our diverse communities are told authentically, that explores the real humanity in all of us as people. So this is a question for everybody here. You know, as artists of color, what do you see as the work that you do in this kind of movement for more authenticity and more specific storytelling that explores really the nuances of us, of our culture and of our histories? Either, you know, what do you hope to accomplish? What do you feel that you're doing currently? This is like a huge, almost unanswerable question. I know, but I think that's really important to share these experiences, you know, to audiences so that they can see and have an opportunity to see and understand marginalized communities.
I really do think that you know, a lot of what brings up misunderstanding and hate and all that, and you know, bigotry is the fact that you don't see the other as a person. And I mean, that's what plays like this, plays with very specific like representation. I think that's what the aim is, right? It's to create the idea that, and not even create the idea, it makes it sound like artifice, but to let people know that you know, we are people too, and that we're not just some weird monolith that has no feeling and has no experience and doesn't, like, we don't hurt when or we don't cry when we're hurt, or we don't have feelings, we don't have families, or we don't go through pain. I mean, that's what this is about, right? We're showing people that there is a real person behind what your perception of other people is, and that doesn't just occur, I think, in you know, that occurs on all levels of media. Here, like, we're doing this at the very grassroots level, and I think that's super important, because like one of the first things, you know, I learned as, you know, doing activist work is gosh, I forgot the phrase now, but like, it's basically learn to bounce the ball. So like, a lot of the time when you're doing things and you're trying to teach people things, standing up on the soapbox doesn't always work. But if you're sitting there playing basketball with the kids and just sharing your stories, that can be super, that can get through to people, you know? And I think that's what we're doing here.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. Actually, I mean, I was getting my MFA at UCLA eons ago, and yeah, early 2000, the department, which I love profusely, was really ingrained and infused in Western, or what we identify as Western theosophy and pedagogy. So that's completely fine with me, because I wasn't a theater major whatsoever. I was an English major. So just really delving myself into Stanislavski, Grotowski, Strasberg, Meisner, Brecht, all of that was really important. But then there was a part of me that was so hungry to be represented, because the moment I stepped out of the sculpture garden, I see brown folks and Asian folks everywhere. It's UCLA, right? I mean, so I had to expand out because I was so hungry. And lo and behold, I met Melissa Velas Abrams the advisor of student organizations, leadership, and engagement at UCLA Seoul. And that's how I started with Theater Fest with Miss Flow Artistas. And that's how I met Earl, bringing room to improv to SIPA, right? So I think that was my trajectory of creating visibility for myself. But then I was starting to see my fellow peers and artists who are so stuck on the colonized mind of trying to fit into the mold of what is white, but then they have people who don't see them that way anyway, and they are stuck in tropes of gangbangers or sassy Latina or a loud Filipina, you know, all that stuff. So that's when it started generating where, well, if I'm feeling this way, I see that Minerva Vieira is feeling that way also. And then so I created this collective and we created stories, and that's how that started. And I was like, oh, well then, but I don't want white directors to be telling my story because it's from a white lens. So I started directing, right? But then there's a certain point where you could just do, how many Sam Shepherds, you know, how many Tennessee Williams, Arthur Millers can you direct? So I'm like, well, I guess I have to write, right? And so, and that's kind of like the trajectory. Yes, it's more work for us, but that's really important. And I do want to piggyback on someone who said, you know, why do you use Taglish? I grew up in the Philippines. I watched English all the time. So, right, indigenizing myself. I don't use decolonize. I use indigenize myself to be in a world where there are a plethora of languages that we hear. We live in Los Angeles, y'all. There, you know, so a plethora, and the beauty of language is so powerful. That moment between Amado and ALLOS, if you really listen, and this is how I do it also, based on the question that I think Abe asked, is that there's a trick to it. If someone speaks Tagalog, the other will respond in English by responding the question in English. So it really is kind of, it's a shift. And now we're in a society where it's instantaneous communication globally. So we are getting in tuned, especially with millennials. They are just spitting rhymes in Spanish, English, you know, and different languages, right? So I think the more we tell stories authentically, the more important it is to become visible. For instance, as a writer, I have a very hard time because it's so isolating, right? But it's really through these actors who live and breathe these stories that it becomes truly alive. But at the end of the day, and this is what live theater does, is it is the communal experience, that it's not really just the playwright, director, and actors, it's really the audience. So indigenizing ourselves, that it's always within the cipher. It's you know, la raza, you know, para sa tao. It's for all of us. It's for the tribe to share and narrate the story.
I want to hop on what Gio has said too. For me, simply enough, why are these stories important? I grew up in the Philippines myself. I came here to LA as a fully formed adult. So I, like, my whole education, everything was in the Philippines. I graduated from Ateneo de Manila. I don't know Carlos Bulosan. You know, and so I was thinking to myself, like, how come I don't know this guy? He was never, you know, and in college, I learned about Plato and Socrates and all these Western philosophers. What do they call it? Continental philosophy. John Paul Sartre, Levinas, which is the Ateneo de Manila's favorite philosopher, like this Emmanuel Levinas guy. And I don't know who Carlos Bulosan is. You know what I mean? This was my education about this guy, reading Giovanni's work. So what was it? Because he was a communist, you know? So what was it? There's just a lot of forces that are funneling their own agenda and their own philosophies into us. That's how I feel getting out of the matrix that is the Philippines. Like, it's a land that, you know, we've been colonized twice by the Spanish and the Americans. We were forced to not speak our language twice by the Spanish and the Americans. And so there's this pain, you know, there's this, when I was in the Philippines living as a local Filipino, I saw the diaspora as people who left us, who got lucky, like, you know, and so there's this bitterness, like, and that's why a lot of local Filipinos feel that, oh, you need to send money over because you're the lucky ones. You need to think about us and not forget about us. But it's not about forgetting. It's about, like, now that I'm out in Zion of this matrix analogy, it's like, oh my goodness, like we've been brainwashed, gaslit, you know, through whatever it is, religion and whatnot. And like, I think Carlos Bulosan was silenced because, you know, he had ties to communism and things like that. And then I myself grew up like, oh, communists are the devil, NPA, these guys, all they do is cause a ruckus. And when people try to go to Batangas, they whip out their machine guns and they're just trying to get money, or they're just trying to fight for a better life, right? It's things like these that we will, how can we expand our point of views, even for ourselves as Asians and Asian Americans, if we don't have these stories, you know? And so it's great to finally, you know, have authors, like there's new books coming out, Arsenic and Adobo, and Leslie Tenorio has you know, which I read the book for. So if you guys want to download the ebook, Leslie Tenorio's Monstrous. It's a series of short stories, and The Son of Good Fortune, which is unapologetically Filipino. So stories like that, just making us visible, and we're no longer ashamed, because there's nothing to be ashamed of. But back then it was like, oh, badui. Badui is a Tagalog word for like, oh, it's cheap and tacky. Who told us? Who gave us the idea that our own stories are cheap and tacky? You know what I mean? So I feel like the more we put it out there, you know, the more it's all just good things. Good things are just going to come.
There's a question from the audience. How can we as audience members help bring more awareness of these underrepresented stories? And I think one of the big things that you can do is to go out and support the work that is out there. And the work is out there. You know, for Artists at Play may not be as well known as Center Theater Group, right? Or as any other large company in Los Angeles, but you know, we've been around for 10 years, and we have 10 years worth of main stage shows, plays that we've worked with, we've developed with playwrights, theater for young audience performances. You know, that's part of it, is that companies that are doing this type of work are out there for almost every marginalized community that you can find that in the United States. We exist in music, in film and television, in music, in publishing, and I would say that it's you know, we're not obviously out there, but we're not impossible to find. If you would like to learn more about Carlos Bulosan and the Filipino American experience, Artists at Play, we curated a whole list of additional resources on our website, artistsatplay.org, that connects to the history. We have book recommendations. You know, we're big advocates of not only plays, but also books. Books seem to be one of the most accessible ways to learn about different communities that are out there, from picture books to middle grade, young, you know, YA, in every genre. You know, our stories are out there, and they're very diverse. So we hope that the audience here tonight, you know, we really appreciate that you're here and listening, and we're there. And there are playwrights like Gio, and actors. Earl also runs an Asian American improv group called Room to Improv. Reuben, I think you need to tell us about Aquafellas. Is that no Aquafellas? Your
Oh no, that was
group?
way back then before
okay.
my
Yo,
theater
that's news to
career.
me too, man. That was,
Yeah,
what do we
we
know
were.
about that?
Jamie
It's
was
just
in that one, right? Was Jamie in that one?
No, he was in Ryan Kabyab Singers. Filipino
Y'all better
singing.
watch out. He's from Ateneo. He's
Yo.
an Atenista, so he's a little bougie.
Oh, damn.
I'm just kidding.
Okay,
just
okay,
kidding.
okay.
I see no lies.
I know when you said Ateneo, I was like, what? Okay. I didn't know that either.
Yeah, and another thing with Artists at Play is we're really interested in looking at what theater for young audiences can do, because we know that school curriculum doesn't include a lot of stories of communities of color. So the work that we do theater for young audiences, we're hoping that can provide that kind of supplementary information and education. The plays that we've presented are more for families and middle grade, mainly because there are, difficult conversations sometimes that can exist, that these plays include about racism. There's, the use of some racial slurs in the stories. But we also know that kids are capable of having these conversations when they're age appropriate. So we hope that the audience out there can, seek us out. And related to youth and youth seeing plays like this, Geo, this show toured with East West Players. I remember, I think you performed it at an event at the Aquarium of the Pacific like years ago. Did you do that?
No. That was with Mesclao. Oh, that was way back when we were doing
okay.
shows. Yeah.
Okay.
No. That's Cuentong Pinoy. Just to honor Henry Ong. Henry Ong is the person who introduced me to Pacific Asian Museum, who got us to do Cuentong Pinoy, where ALLOS, the character of ALLOS, was one of the characters, and that's the thing that I submit to Marilyn Takuda. Good memory, Stephanie. That was
okay.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, that was 10 years ago.
So what were the youth reactions to the show? Did you go to any of the schools when this show toured? Like, what did you mentioned? This show primarily goes to LA area schools, which have very diverse student populations, especially in the San Gabriel Valley. You're going to have a lot of Asian American kids. What was the kind of reaction to ALLOS?
Well, I think the first thing that they attach to is their language being spoken, their Lola's language, right? So that's not something that they hear a lot. Although if they have TFC at home, they probably hear it. But for someone who, because ALLOS grows, right? He starts out as a kid, so there's a direct correlation, a shared experience of being a child that they adhere to, but also seeing someone. I get really emotional during these talks, just seeing someone who looked like them, right? Even the hui, those little things that only Filipinos will know, you'll know, right? So there are moments during the show where you hear kids laughing, and there's it's like you just hear like 3 of them, right? Because you look and it's like, oh yeah, of course, right? And I think it's really that visibility, right? The younger we get POCs or marginalized people to see that they're worthy, the more empowered they are, right? I think so. I mean, the wonderful thing about that is the violence doesn't really happen until the tail end, so they're seasoned to it, right? Also, they play games on, so they're very, very keen on that kind of violence. But yeah, I think the main thing is that sometimes kids are speechless because they're like, I don't know what to say, right? They're so in awe of the actors, not the playwright.
Both.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love seeing kids reactions. And you're right, when they see someone, because they're normal entertainment, television, movies, it's not a reflection of who they are. I mean, it's entertainment, but to get to see themselves up on stage and to hear their stories and that that personal connection, it really it is empowering, and it leads to wanting to know more. It leads to kind of a more fleshed out view, right, of the world that they live in and the communities that they live in and the people that they live around. You hope that it builds empathy and is the first step towards raising and having kids and youth that are anti-racist, and are going to see the world and want justice for all. I mean really, and we're hoping that this plays like ALLOS, plays like Question 27, Question 28, the other work that comes out of theaters of color helps add to that understanding of the people in who we live with and who live in our communities and we go to school with. I believe that's all the questions that, Tim Miller has, as schools open up more, are there any plans to tour this production now or in the future? I think that's always a maybe. The school opening is really, or theaters coming back, I think it's a very unknown right now. I think that a lot of Los Angeles area theaters are hoping to come back indoors, in person, in the fall. What's happening with schools, I think we're unsure, as even this year, not all school districts chose to come back in person. But I think we're always hoping to find different ways of reaching families and youth with the work that Artists at Play does, and with the amazing work and talent of artists of color throughout Los Angeles. I have one last question for everybody, and now's the time to tell us all about any upcoming projects you have, anything you're particularly proud of, anything you want us to watch or listen to. We'll start with Reuben. Any new projects coming up that you're excited about?
Again, I would encourage people to download the audiobook version of Son of Good Fortune and Monstrous by Leslie Tenorio. So he's a Filipino American author based in North California, I think. And yeah, he's from the Bay Area. Terrific stories, and I proudly did the narration for his audiobooks. I did there are a couple of things, but they're NDAs. I don't know, but they're out there. They're out there. Earl and I will be performing Almost Maine with a bunch of Filipino friends. Oh yes. Yeah. Oh wait. I also I have written my first sketch comedy
nice,
with actually the mission in mind of. So my mission is to make something absurdly funny, because I think island humor is very absurd, very nihilistic and fatalistic and just all out, because I think it's all the typhoons and storms and storms over alive. Let's just laugh it off kind of thing. And so the sketch comedy is essentially, my goal is to thread the local and the diasporic Filipinos. I think I touched on the divide earlier. So my goal is to unite the Philippine diaspora through humor, and kind of really touching on that island humor a little bit, and really expressing that for all it is. And just watch out for it. I'll just make an announcement. Follow me in all my social media so you can hear the announcement.
I have I submitted my second draft for the San Diego Repertories Commission. So this is the third play. ALLOS is the first one about brothers. Criers for Hires is about the titas, the aunties. And then this this one is called The Butterfly of Chula Vista. It's about
That's an amazing title.
yeah, it's a Butterfly of Chula Vista. It's about a Filipino Mexican gay man who comes back because he needs work, and his mom wants him to become a nurse, and so and then there's an auntie who's a nurse, and then his best friend's a nurse. So it's all about nurses, but all he wants to do is become a drag queen. So it's a drag queen musical about Filipino nurses.
And it's a musical? Oh my god.
It's a musical. So they sing, you're gonna love this, Reuben. They sing like Paru Paru Bukid, Tubig at Langis, and then they sing like 9 to 5 by Dolly Parton. So it's a mishmash of karaoke Filipino songs, folk songs, and 80s and 90s music. So yeah, we'll wait on what happens next for that one.
That's great. Earl, you go.
I don't know. I guess there's a few things. Like Reuben said, a bunch of us have started like a film actors kind of class. So we meet every other week, but we are doing a reading of Almost Maine, and it's actually a charity fundraiser to I'm not sure which charity we're going to be donating to, but it's going to be for like to stop Asian hate, the hashtag, it's going to be put towards that campaign somewhere. That's happening on the 27th of this month, and a feature film that I associate produced and acted in, Lumpia with Vengeance, is playing up at CamFest this next
Lumpia with a
week.
vengeance!
Lumpia with a Vengeance! Starring Mark Munoz, Danny Trejo's in it, so we're all going to be up there next week.
And Earl Baylon.
And also, yeah, I guess this guy, I don't know him. And that's it. Every week I have a cooking show called Pots and Pan Geekery, where I cook really like show or dishes based on nerdy intellectual properties like Star Wars or Street Fighter and stuff like that. So that's coming back. But yeah, that is all. That's it.
That's great. And everyone's social media handles is on the ALLOS program, which you can download from the Artists at Play website. It's one of the links that you can find along with the link to the YouTube page for the play. So thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I'd like to thank our panelists, Giovanni Ortega, Reuben Wee, and Earl Baylon for joining us tonight. And special thanks to Monica Lee and UCLA alumni for hosting this event in celebration of Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. Artists at Play is grateful to have this opportunity to share our work with the UCLA community. ALLOS, the story of Carlos Bulosan, is available on our YouTube channel until this Friday evening. And then on Saturday, we'll stream Question 27, Question 28 by Che Yu, directed by Julie Lee. Presented in partnership with the Japanese American National Museum, Question 27, Question 28 uses interviews and testimonials to explore the experiences of Japanese American women during the World War II internment camps. You can find information about both plays on our website, artistsatplay.org. Thank you everyone for joining us. We really appreciate having you here, and have a good rest of your evening. Thank you everyone. Good night.
Bye everybody. Thank you.